This is the musicmarketing.com podcast from Nashville, Tennessee. I'm David Hooper. With me from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, it's Wendy Wallace. Wendy, episode number 5. You excited?
Yes, I am very excited.
Got a new format.
Yeah. Weeks ago, back in February, whenever it was, you asked people on Facebook to post their questions for you. And we got a bunch of them. Thank you to everyone. And there was one in particular that stood out that we're going to start out with first, that was asked by an artist named Shannon Kennedy. And she had a really great question for you. And we're going to delve into her question this episode.
Okay, well, let's give her a plug. Shannon is out of Los Angeles, California. Website, shannon-kennedy.com.
We're going to play a clip of one of her songs from the CD Behind Your Eyes. The song is called You Said.
Shannon Kennedy on the musicmarketing.com podcast. That was You Said from the album Behind Your Eyes. She's at shannon-kennedy.com. Shannon had a question for us today.
Originally, Shannon had asked a question on Facebook about balancing time between your creative pursuits and honing your craft, and also getting business tasks done. So I followed up with Shannon and got her to elaborate on the question and also give her insight into balancing time.
Yeah, well, basically what I asked was how an independent musician should balance out the business aspects of their music and the actual creative aspects, because, you know, I don't think there's any one right way to do it, and you kind of have to go with the ebb and flow, and it changes on a day-to-day basis. But, you know, I'm not expecting there to be a magic formula for how to balance business and the creative side of music. But, you know, what his advice would be for balancing that out, like what a suggestion would be. Like, is there a minimum of how many hours a day or how much time a day you should spend doing the business side, how much you should spend working on your songwriting, or how much you should spend actually developing your craft, like your instrument or your voice?
So have there been anything or any things that you have done that have actually worked for you thus far, and things that you've tried that didn't work for you?
Things that don't work for me, in my experience, have been to just kind of do things without a plan. I think the best way to go at it is to, you know, kind of set up some sort of schedule. Like, today I'm going to spend an hour practicing my instrument. I'm going to spend, you know, an hour or two working on songwriting. I'm going to spend half an hour sending out emails, and I'm going to spend half an hour promoting on my social networks and things like that, actually going at it with a plan. You know, it may change. Something may come up that takes more time, or you may get through things a little bit faster, but kind of setting aside the time to do those certain things, I've found in my personal experience that has worked, but you kind of have to plan it out. You can't just go at it randomly.
Okay. Okay. And any other things that you have found that have been just really difficult in terms of balancing the two? As in, one of the things I know from working on the book with David is that it became really evident that a musician, regardless of what they're doing, right, if they have something to promote, if they don't, whatever it is that they're doing, they always seem to need to stay in touch with fans. And I always thought, like especially, for example, when David was working on the book last year, he pretty much devoted all of his time to working and editing the book. And I would imagine that for a musician such as yourself, that there would be times when you're just so plugged into songwriting or working on a CD that you really don't want to have to be being on Twitter and that kind of thing. I mean, is that a safe assumption? Do you go through phases where sometimes you're cool with doing business stuff, even sometimes when you enjoy it, and then other times when you're like, I wish I didn't have to do the business stuff?
Definitely. When you're working on a project, you're really involved in it, and that's your primary focus. And it's hard to pull yourself away and try and do other things because you want to get it done and you invest a lot into it. So having to set aside time to, go on Facebook and post things. And then plus, on top of it, it's hard when you're in the middle of a project. What do you share? What do you keep to yourself for the moment? Because things do change as you're working on a project. And then on top of it, sometimes you just don't have things to share. And so, creating some sort of conversation outside of what you're working on can sometimes be difficult. And then as far as, just balancing your schedule and making the time to do both, sometimes you may not be motivated to actually do both. Like there's days even it's like, I don't feel like writing or I don't feel like practicing. But you kind of have to move beyond that and almost force yourself to do it just because, doing things on a daily basis, even if it's only a little bit at a time, it's so much better than doing things in spurts, where you don't practice for 5 days and then you practice for 6 hours one day. That is not as good for your development as, maybe setting aside half an hour every single day.
Gotcha. Okay, so here's my final question for you. In David's book, he mentions, in the chapter where he covers this stuff, one of the things that he mentions is that you need to divide up your tasks into 3 categories. There's the things that only you can do, the things that you like to do, and the things that you need to outsource. Have you thought of the business tasks that you have to do, thought of it in those terms? And are there certain tasks that, obviously, the ones that you obviously have to do are, like, you can't outsource playing live, that kind of thing. But have you thought in terms of dividing it up into those 3 categories, and what kinds of things do you enjoy doing, and what kinds of things have you thought about outsourcing or actually have outsourced?
That's a really good question because there's a lot you can outsource. You can outsource the songwriting itself. You can bring in another writer. You can outsource the production of your album. You can outsource a lot of the business aspects. Most of it you don't need to do, and there's a lot of people who don't do any of it. There's a lot that you could decide to do yourself and a lot that you can outsource. And, for a lot of people, they have a hard time kind of giving up some of the tasks that they need to do to other people because, there's the expression that if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. And it's hard to kind of surrender some of that, especially as an independent artist where, you work really hard on it, and sometimes giving certain tasks up to other people, you don't know what's going to happen with it. Whereas when you do it yourself, you have a little bit more control over, what the end result is. But yeah, I've definitely outsourced some stuff. Some of my albums, well, for the most part, I produce all of my albums myself. The last one, though, I brought in someone to help me with the production. So that alleviated a bit of the responsibility for me. And as well, I can't play every instrument myself as much as I would like to be able to. Mm-hmm. So outsourcing some of those responsibilities, bringing in another keyboard player when I could play keyboards myself, because, sometimes you can't do it better. You may be able to do it yourself and it's easier and it saves you money, but, just having someone who actually has that skill set is far better than trying to do it yourself. And then the same with the business stuff. You know, maybe you can write your own bio, but it's not going to be good as if you hire someone to write the bio for you, or a press release, or, you know, and you only have so many hours in a day, and your most valuable asset is your time. You know, so deciding how you're going to spend your time, whether it's doing the business stuff or doing the music stuff, that's really important. So if you can outsource certain tasks, like maybe having someone help you manage your website instead of doing it yourself, or, you know, things like that. I think those are things that you can easily kind of hand over to someone else. And, you know, the whole street team thing, I love that idea, because really it's having your friends and your fans help you with promotion and keeping your image and your name and your music in the minds of people, because you have to maintain your presence. I mean, before, you know, you do an album and it'd take you a year or two between albums, and people kind of forget about you, and you have to almost start over every single time you release an album. But now, with the single format, I mean, I love the single format because you can constantly release new music and you kind of stay out there in front. And I think that's really important, especially as an independent artist, when you don't have labels and a lot of money behind you kind of pushing you, you know? So anything that you can do to maintain your momentum, I think is a really good thing. And so if you need help doing that, I definitely think that's something that you should do. Find out whatever your weaknesses are and try and build a team around you that complements that.
Perfect. So bottom line is, what you're needing and what you're wanting some tips and advice on is basically how to find that structure, how to fit everything into, you know, a day in the life, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Wendy, so basically I think what Shannon is asking, she's got two parts of her music business, as do most musicians. There's the music and the business, and what are some things that you can do to make sure everything gets done, because only so many hours in the day. So how do you balance the creative aspect of what you're doing as opposed to the business, which is also important, equally, maybe even more so when it comes to actually selling records?
That's right. And we're going to give her some tips. You specifically are going to give her some tips. But just to note, too, that you actually cover this in a whole chapter in your book as well.
Yeah, the book, Six Figure Musician. If you're not familiar with it, it's available for free. Musicianbook.com is where to get that. Six Figure Musician. Paperback, available on Amazon. So the first thing I think that is important to know, whether you're working on music or you're working on the business aspects of this industry, is to know where you want to go, know what your goals are. Strangely enough, I mean, I think a lot of musicians get into this business, and I did. I was a musician before. I was in the marketing aspect of the music industry. You know, we get into this because we like playing music. Maybe we want to have a voice. That's what it was for me. Some people want to get girls. That's a great reason to get in. But there's not a whole lot of thought about where they want to go beyond that. So I think it's important, when you're looking at just the limited amount of time that you have during the day and where you want to spend your time, you need to know what it is that you want to get done. Only then can you chop it up slice by slice, bit by bit, and actually start taking care of it. You sometimes you're going to get where you want to go. This is one of the things that I talked about in the book. We talked about the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland. Was it the Cheshire Cat?
Yes.
Okay, I don't want to mess up my Alice in Wonderland quote. But he said, you know, basically you have to know where you're going, because everywhere is somewhere, and that somewhere, anywhere but here, may not be where it is that you want to go.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And actually, can I ask you to elaborate on that a little bit, in that I think that we all have our big dream goals.
Yeah.
And we know we kind of have an idea of where we want to end up. But then how do you break it down into the smaller goals that will help you get there? And to know, you know, or to at least have an idea when you're starting out about the goals that you should have, the more short-term goals that you need to have in order to get you to your bigger goal.
Well, I think what you need to do when you talk about bigger goals, it can't just be, I just want to be famous. You need to say, well, what does that look like? So, for example, you want to be famous? Okay, well, that for me is on the cover of National Enquirer or on the cover of PerezHilton.com or on the cover of USA Today. So if that's your goal, you're going to break down a big goal, such as being famous, into other little bitty goals. And then you're going to say, well, I want to be on the front page of PerezHilton.com. How could I do that? So you're going to have to think about what it's going to take that would make Perez interested in you, and then think about how it is that you can get that information to Perez so that he's aware of you and able to get it up there. Does that make sense? You start with the big goal, the macro goal, if you will, and start chopping it up piece by piece.
Okay. Next tip.
Before we get into that, can I give a couple more goals, just if you don't know where to start with your goals?
Sure.
All right, let's think of like this. How many days do you want to be on the road? How many albums do you want to sell? How much money do you want to make? What do you want your typical day to look like? Those 4 things are probably where I would start. So if you don't really have any idea, say, well, I just want to do music. Well, look at those 4 things. Look at how many shows you want to play, how many days you want to be on the road, how much money you want to bring in, how many albums that you want to sell or downloads, and usually is what we're doing these days, digital downloads, and also just think about your typical day.
Awesome advice. I like that.
Okay, so next step. This is something that I had to do. It's funny that you mentioned the book, because this is something that I had to do with the book. I have a 2-room office. I have the music side, and I have the business side. And music, of course, I'm not really a musician these days, but let's say it's my creative side, which in the book's case was writing the book. I've got an area where I do all of my creative work, such as thinking of new campaigns, ad campaigns, or branding, or anything on the creative end. And then I have something such as this, which is more of a business task, and we're recording, and I have that on the other side of the office. So what I like to do is have separate spaces, and the reason for that is because I act a certain way in one space, and I act a different way in the other space. And it's just something that enables me to kind of jump into that mode quicker. It's not that you couldn't go and, for lack of a better analogy, have a barbecue inside the church sanctuary, right? But you have a separate space for a church sanctuary, which is for like praying or for the service, because it helps you to get into that mode. Does that make sense? You have a picnic area for the picnic. So same thing with your music. Same thing with your business. I would say do separate spaces. It just helps you to get into that mode quicker.
Okay. So when it comes to actually taking care of business tasks, right, because this is primarily what we're going to focus on, because everybody has their own way of how it is that they get into their creative mode and how it is that they create. So when it comes to business, what would you recommend in terms of, you sit down and there's so many things that need to be done. And I know for me personally that if I'm not working like from a list, or I don't have any scheduled tasks or anything like that, I sit down and I get so overwhelmed at the idea of I just don't know where to start, then I actually don't end up doing anything. So what would you recommend in terms of getting organized and scheduling tasks?
Well, you hit on it right there with what you said. One, scheduling. You also mentioned working from a list. So let's start with scheduling. Just like you've got separate spaces to do your music and your business, you've got separate times to do music and your business. And the reason you do this is because, one, you're not waiting for inspiration. You're letting things happen. A lot of bands just wait for inspiration. But inspiration, does it come? Maybe. That's why it takes some people like 8 years to put out a record. When you actually set a schedule, your servo mechanism, if you will, your subconscious mind, can sit there and work on it while you're doing other things, just preparing you for maybe the 8 a.m. writing appointment, the 9 a.m. writing appointment, or the 7 p.m. gig. Doing something at a consistent time every day is how you're going to get more done. So I would say, one, scheduling things. Two, working from a list. And this gets into the fourth thing that I had on my list, and you kind of hit on it just accidentally. I don't know if you did that or not, but that's an important thing. When you don't know what to do, there's always something to do. And for example, like today, let's say today is Monday. if I have something that comes up Monday afternoon, a lot of times people will get distracted, and something in the afternoon, they'll drop everything that they're doing and they'll start on the new task that has come up Monday afternoon. What I do is I write it down and I just start it Tuesday. It's not going to hurt to wait, unless something's on fire, it's not going to hurt to wait 24 hours. And that way you're always going to have a list, because there are things that come up throughout the day. Just write them down and get started on the next day.
Okay. So one of the things that Shannon had kind of asked is, how much time do you spend on business tasks? And of course, everybody has a different lifestyle and a different schedule, so that amount of time is going to be different for everyone. But let's just say hypothetically that everyone could devote an hour a day, minimum hour a day, to their business tasks.
Okay. How would I divide that up?
Yeah, how would you divide that up?
First of all, before we get into how I would divide it up, I will say that an hour a day, if you can't spend an hour a day on your music, I think you need to look at how serious you are about it. I know there are a lot of late night infomercials that make it look like you can just sit on the beach and drive a fancy car and have a yacht and a big mansion without doing anything. I think a lot of people, musicians especially, have bought into that because those are some of the images that we're fed, whether we look at MTV Cribs. The reality is that those big cribs on MTV that you're seeing, one, they might not even be owned by the artist that is living there, and two, the artists are always on the road. So a lot of times they're not even, that's why they're so clean, because they're not even being lived in. So with that said, 60 minutes a day, I think there are two important things that are going to help you, and this is how I would segment it. One, I would spend some time on revenue generation. Those are things that are specific to bringing money into your bank account. That could be playing gigs. That's what it is for most bands. Sometimes it's going to be something about digital downloads. For example, if you're going to negotiate, like a place in a record store, or some kind of licensing agreement, or some kind of placement on iTunes. For example, any kind of revenue generation, something that's going to help you get more people to your shows and make more money off shows, or help you sell more CDs, that's going to be important. And this kind of blends into it. I would spend some time every day on relationships. I like to send everybody that wants to get in touch with me via Twitter or to Twitter. And the reason for that is because I don't have to spend, hours and hours either returning calls or sending out emails, and I can answer questions quickly within like 140 characters. So if you've got fans that you need to keep in touch with, I would suggest doing it through like a microblog application like Twitter. I would also say, spending times on calls or emails for the really, really important, like the things that can't be done via Twitter, such as like booking. And this could be just, for example, if you're on tour all the time, you need to keep in touch with a booking agent. Keeping that relationship going on. I think any kind of relationship, you and I, we've worked together for 5 or 6 years now, Wendy. And, I know some things about you. You're in Canada, for example. You're a fan of certain bands up there. And sometimes I'll see news of them. I'll say, hey, Wendy, have you seen this thing about the Trues, for example? Have you seen this article? And doing like little relationship things that are going to further our relationship. So you can do that with any kind of relationship that you have. I'll give you an example. I was going through my office last night and going through an old filing cabinet and saw, this is a guy that everybody on this podcast would have heard of. He used to play in a band. This is from 1996, and I found one of his old ads. So I scanned it for him, and I didn't have any reason to send it other than just be like, hey, dude, thought you might want a copy of this. But that furthers the relationship. So that's very, very important, and that's something you should spend part of your 60 minutes on. And I would say beyond that, I would say just the quick social media things that you can do. It doesn't take much time to upload an Instagram photo of your gig, or just kind of put up a little bitty tour diary on the blog, or upload a quick video on YouTube.
So for anyone out there who just kind of wants a general kind of template of how to spend your time, from listening to what you just said, would it be fair to say that you sit down and you get rid of all distractions, and you give yourself, let's say, that minimum hour of time? First things first is to focus on, like you said, revenue generating things. So you make phone calls, you get back to people, you follow up with people, you do whatever it is that you need to do to start generating income. That would be the first thing. And then the second thing is, I'm curious about, like, you'd mentioned like relationship building, but can we like divide that up into like two categories: relationships that's going to further your career, but also like engaging with
social media. Okay, sure. Yeah. So if I had the 60-minute pie you're talking about, revenue generation, I would talk about just spend about 30 minutes on that. Relationship building, just a quick call, quick Twitter follow-ups, quick emails, about 20 minutes on that. And any kind of social media updates, about 10 minutes. People get really carried away with social media, and it's a complete time suck for most people, where you've got the 6 tips to do that, and the hottest J-Lo bikini photos, and did you see Katy Perry's dress at this latest awards show? So I don't spend a whole lot of time on social media. If you're doing social media, I think it's great to interact with people, but that's where I call that relationships, like responding to Twitter messages or responding to emails and things. The other element of social media, you don't need to really consume information as much as you need to put it out there for your fans.
So the other thing too that I'm curious about is if you can give tips to people who, so it's cool when you're at home and you're in your routine and you can, get to your computer, let's say almost like the same time every day to do your work. But what happens when you still have to take care of all of those things, all of those business tasks and engaging with fans, but you're on the road? Or what happens if your routine is kind of disrupted for one reason or another? Like when I was talking to Shannon as an example, I used the example of, like if you're spending 6 weeks and you're more focused on recording a CD than business, or if, life just happens and your schedule gets disrupted.
Well, again, I think you have to look at the big goals there and think about the big picture. If one of your big goals is to get an album out and to sell it, well, of course, sometimes you're going to be spending more time on big goal things, such as creating the album. Certainly for me, with the 6-figure musician, I took a whole year off. Actually, the whole project was about 2 years, but there was 1 year when all I was doing was that book, almost. So my schedule was changed a lot, and you have to think about the big picture. But I will say this, for you guys that are on the road, there are road schedules that you have, and there are stay-at-home schedules that you're going to have. The road schedule, it's not going to differ as much maybe as you think that it is. You basically probably drive to a city, you're going to eat your meals, you're going to play a gig, you're going to go back to the hotel, you're going to get up, you're going to drive to another city, whatever. There's still some similarities in there, and the main thing isn't that you're missing the 7 to 9 a.m. writing appointment. It's just that you still make time to write, and that might be later in the afternoon, it might be later on in the evenings. How do you make time to engage your fans with social media? Well, I mean, maybe you're sending them pictures of the gigs, or you're uploading tour diaries or something like that. You're still doing that kind of stuff. It doesn't have to look the exact same. Just think about those big goals that you're talking about and do it that way. So the final thing that Shannon and I actually talked about was outsourcing, both in terms of hiring people to do certain things and also having a really strong street team. Any tips and suggestions on how it is that you can connect with the right people and entrust them with taking care of the smaller tasks so that you can focus more on the revenue generating things that you have to do? Sure. A couple of things. I think when outsourcing, and let's just define outsourcing. I know it's got a lot of connotations with like Indian call centers or something when you're calling the cable company, right? That people they think of that as outsourcing. That is one way to outsource, but we're not talking about putting jobs overseas or anything like that. We're just simply saying having somebody else do a job that you don't want to do. Here's the issue that most bands face when they do that. They're used to doing a lot of stuff themselves. They're not necessarily great leaders. So I'm going to give you 2 tips, Wendy, and one of them is for your street team, how to start that up, even if you don't have an official street team. The other one is just to get used to giving people specific information on what you want done. There's a website. It's called odesk.com. A lot of guys on there from outside of the United States, where maybe $5 or $10 is a considerable amount of money, certainly more than it would be in the United States. So you can get tasks done for $5 or $10, maybe little things like a logo, graphics, WordPress help if you've got a WordPress blog, any kind of web design and graphic design, or else data entry or research. You could tell somebody, hey, find me 10 clubs in New York City. I need the addresses, the phone numbers, and who the booking agent is. And you can hire somebody for $5 or $10 and they'll go out and do that, so you don't have to. So I would suggest go to Odesk and just get used to, even if you're not going to use that information, just get used to delegating that kind of task, finding out how it is that you need to tell people to do things, how they respond, and just get yourself as a better leader. So getting into the habit of it, that would be my first step for somebody who's not used to delegating and wants to start up a staff. Secondly, you mentioned like street teams and getting people motivated to do work for you. I would just say start with where you are and start with the fans that you have. Your most engaged fans are the ones that are going to be more likely to do things for you. It's tough to get like a quote unquote street team together if you can't, or if you don't have the skills to engage your most engaged fans. So I would simply say, like, going to those most engaged fans, the guys that are at your show, and saying like, hey, listen, this show is $5. You bring a friend, you each get in for $5, but I'm going to give you a free drink. Or you bring a friend, it's $5 for one person. When you come together, it's $5 for two people. Or when you come together, it's free. So I would suggest just trying to engage your fan base to go out there and tell their friends. And that's kind of like a street team. That's what a street team does. Except it's probably going to be more engagement than a street team, because a street team, when most people think about that, that's just like flyering, sending out cassettes or CDs or stickers or whatever tchotchke that people are giving away at the time.
All right. Any final thoughts?
Well, I think it's a great question. If you've got more questions, online, I am at facebook.com/music marketing. That's the Facebook page. But the best way, as I mentioned earlier, we'll try this Twitter thing out that I'm telling you to do, which is twitter.com/David Hooper. Thank you for being here with me as my co-host. Shannon, thanks for asking the question, and thanks to everybody else who's sending questions via Facebook. Thank you for listening. We've got some great episodes coming up. Wendy, the next episode, we will have an interview with a man that just did a documentary, A Decade in an Unsigned Rock Band. He documented the whole thing. It's got some great lessons. We're going to dive in deep with that. And we'll see you next time on the musicmarketing.com podcast.
Yeah, we're going to wrap up this episode with another one of Shannon Kennedy's songs called Lying in Your Lying Arms. Thank you so much for listening.
Try to forget how it feels. Thanks for listening to the musicmarketing.com podcast. If you have any questions or comments, email David and Wendy at musicmarketingpodcast@gmail.com. To listen to past shows and get even more music marketing advice, visit musicmarketing.com.